International and Political Studies at the University of Lodz, Poland. He is affiliated with the Department of American and Media Studies and Women's Studies Center. He graduated from American and Media Studies at the University of Lodz, Poland, European, at the Jean Moulin University in Lyon, France, and completed a postgraduate program in Cultural and Media Studies at Utrecht University, the Netherlands. Professor Marek holds a Ph.D. in Humanities, Literary Studies. He is beneficiary of European Commission, University of Buenos Aires, Argentina, Polish Science Foundation, University of Tel Aviv, Israel, Polish American Fulbright Commission, and Erasmus Mundus, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Professor Marek has English publications in the fields of digital aesthetics, critical theory, gender, media technology, psychoanalysis, and visual culture. His main areas of research include visual culture, techno-ecology, philosophy of communication, body and space. He teaches courses on media and communication, American culture and society, post-humanism, and feminist thought. And that's this last field of knowledge, of expertise, that is going to be the subject of the conference. We are very proud to have here today by Professor Marek, which is entitled Nostalgia for Irigaray, or Irigaray in French, Feminist Politics of Language and Writing. Thank you very much for being with us and tomorrow. Also, it was a pleasure, and we are very excited to have you here to all with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria Manuel, for this wonderful introduction and for having me again. I've been coming to Tel Aviv for quite some time, so I know the place, and I've been smitten with it quite, I think, reciprocally. So we've got along very well. Well, today, I have an honor and the pleasure to actually address one of the topics that is very dear to me, as it's been a long-lasting and enduring sort of inspiration, and it's been sort of all along contributing to my own growth and development. So it's also, it runs in the veins, so to say, of my own sort of personal and political and academic, obviously, sort of development. So something that I consider very personal. So if I emphasize or I sort of grow more charismatic on some issues that I discuss, well, you know, bear with me, please, or just stop me, because I oftentimes kind of, you know, get to derail myself from the kind of intensity of the pace of what I'm talking about. So please stop me if you need a clarification, or maybe you need me to slow down a bit. I'll be happy to do it. So yes, today, as you see on board, hopefully it's legible. I've decided to title my talk today, which is not going to be a proper lecture, but rather a kind of more intimate and hopefully also interactive, to some extent, time and space permitting, sort of conversation. That's what I'm hopeful to achieve here today. And you've been of different ages. You've been at different sort of stages of your academic careers, if I may use this capitalistic term. And so, to some of you, I'm sure some of Irigaray's writings are already familiar, and maybe you've read a lot of the sort of writings I've assigned for our meeting. So feel free to contribute, to share your own personal accounts or experiences that, of course, are relevant and I'm sure adequate will be to what we're going to be discussing today. So I've chosen to title my talk today Nostalgia, for many different reasons. Some may say, or at least at first glance and at first sight, that may seem odd, to say the least, or a little strange. But I'll account for my sort of selection of the terms that figure in the title in the course of my talk. Nostalgia for Luce Irigaray, and the sort of subtitle goes Feminist Politics of Language and Writing. So that I find very much timely and also necessary for political and ethical reasons, and nowadays in the very sort of present day, quite dramatic and turbulent context of Europe. And the European context is going to be the platform from which I'm going to address these issues, and I'm going to situate and contextualize this topic in. So just to acknowledge the artists that actually I've selected to sort of well, for the opening slide is a Polish-born American artist, Elżbieta Kazimierczak. She's a Chicago-based, pretty popular, pretty famous artist. She's made her artwork mainly with different types of materials, and she's been dealing with the case, if I may put it very briefly, of trauma. Herself having gone through a very turbulent, very dramatic sort of personal experiences. She has landed in the United States, and sort of this is the way she found most adequate to sort of deal with her traumatic experiences, very much obviously related with personal violence, domestic violence. And this is also something that will somehow percolate my talk today, because this talk is going to obviously address the issue of violence, symbolic violence to be precise, but of course symbolic violence is equally and always immediately physical violence, because it of course starts with the language from within our bodies, and it gets translated in a very bodily, fleshy, corporeal way onto the other person. So, yes.
Could you just try to know?
Oh, yes.
I have your.
I wish I could. Oh, do you? Perfect.
It's difficult to get your name.
That's her first name, and all right. Thank you. Elżbieta Kazimierczak. So that's her name, and she has her website. So of course you feel free and explore more. This is one of her artwork. As I said, she basically compiles this out of different combinations of different materials, and to sort of not really as she herself sort of accounts for her artwork, not to represent anything, but to effectively weave kind of the narrative, you know, to weave the story, you know, like in a very American kind of a quilt-driven type of sort of narrative, you know, making. So here you have, I mean, she has these different kind of seemingly deformed or disfigured sort of figurations of women's bodies, kind of veiled or curtailed or sort of woven into these different, also as you can see in several places there are different kind of lyrics written in. So it's quite a fascinating sort of art story. So obviously I think just because to me it appeals in a very nostalgic fashion, it kind of exudes to me the nostalgic aura. So I like to use this particular work to kind of support my talk today. So by way of opening right now, I would like us to listen to three ideally different video clips to get us started. So hopefully there are no loudspeakers here, but I think it'll be loud enough, hopefully, if we can just... okay. All right, well, this is the first one. It's by Green Day, Say Goodbye. I don't know if you're familiar with this band, pretty famous. Nowadays, it's been around for quite some time. It starts with a casket or coffin, tellingly, and symptomatologically as well. So let's see what we can do here. Okay, I think it's... Of course, a lot of you, I'm sure, deal with the analysis, critical analysis of visual culture, right? So, what are your kind of reception, understanding this video is symptomatic of, or what does it tell us, or of a certain sort of suffocation, you know, the amount, the combustion of these imageries, and also the music that is very repetitive, and also the words, the lyrics are repetitive, you know, create this feel of a combustion, like some sort of, you know, a place out of which you can never escape. You know, it's like we're like a mouse, you know, like that keeps on running, you know, yeah, exactly, the circular, yeah, cyclical kind of movement, and we're entrapped within. You know, of course, there are a lot of issues addressed here. Of course, you know, in a very brief manner, one of them being heavy masculinity. You know, could you see any women? I mean, aside from the Holy Mary, of course, right? The figure. So there is, it's some sort of one of these prevailing concepts, but also images that we can sort of see around these days, right? And very much militarized, you know, also the militarization of states, right, that is happening. Also, that is very much related to the wider issue of the kind of privatization of space in general. I mean, the public spaces in present-day Europe, they keep on disappearing, you know. So basically, the public realms are getting more and more limited. You know, people, I mean, yeah.
Isn't that cleverly wrong, the point that is being by the private public?
I depending on, of course, how that would require further discussion.
This idea that we are losing our own space, everything is,
but as a collective,
is diluting into this sort of private, public realm, you know, so it's just...
well, by public, I mean specifically the public realm, essentially, as a space that we can share as a collective, you know. The space, I mean, look at what's been happening politically, and also, you know, in terms of politically motivated social movements, you know. They're back in the streets, you know, demanding that public space be reclaimed, you know, and then what they face and then what they witness is the government, you know, the establishment, basically railing against them by sending troops, literally, you know, almost the tanks on the streets, right? Also, there is this fascinating essay that I could easily recommend right now, very pertinent to what we're talking about, the militarization of peace. It's the title, by Reza Negarestani from 2001. It's an interesting title itself, the militarization of peace. And given that it was written back in 2001, I think it's been very visionary and prophetic in many ways. I mean, he could really capture the kind of spirit that has happened to turn into our reality of today. And has determined our sense of, well, you know, like security, for instance, these days. You know, one of the sort of beacons, but also one of the most powerful concepts around which novel politics are being woven. Also, you know, this is one of the greatest values that we cherish these days, you know, security, right, and human life. This is quite interesting. And here, what we can see is that in a parallel fashion, this sort of value, the supreme sort of value of human life is being totally desecrated. You know, it's a sacrilege. It's literally, we're getting disposed of ourselves this way or another. We kill each other this way or another. You know, I mean, of course we can enumerate a number of examples. Here the video does it in its own fashion, but of course human trafficking, you know, body organs trafficking, you know, people killed for everything, literally, you know, traded, sold, taken advantage of, and so on and so forth. So yes, on the one hand, I think we need to see that that these two processes are sort of moving on in a parallel fashion. That on the one hand, we create this sort of illusion of safety and security and peace, but at the same time, at the very same time, you know, like the space is getting more and more militarized. You know, we ourselves becoming more and more paranoid. You know, we fall into these traps of, you know, very primitive sort of instincts of survival. So yes, and that kind of, I mean, how to put it, these two discourses, they inform one another. So, and I think this video clip in many ways sort of creates this message in a visual way and also in a lyrical way that sort of wants us to be shocked, you know, to kind of uproot us from this sense of all too easy sense of safety and being okay. You know, because also we have to acknowledge that this sort of pretty long era of postmodernism has, I mean, this is what postmodernism has been all about, you know, the removal of foundations that was supposedly to contribute to sort of construct freedom. You know, that was all for the sake of freedom, you know. Once we remove gods, once we remove idols, you know, once we remove the established patterns of behavior, social sort of conduct and so on, we'll be free, we'll be finally free, you know, and can do anything. Well, we are learning little by little, slowly, that we're far from that, you know, falling into yet another kind of trap. So, so in other words, I think what this video addresses is the question of attachment. You know, calling us, creating this appeal, sending out this appeal, say goodbye to the ones that we love. It's a very powerful message, you know, that we still, I think, especially as critical, politically motivated thinkers, we find it so difficult to really put into praxis on our everyday sort of basis of existence. That we kind of still, you know, we may call ourselves feminists or whatever other critical tradition we affiliate with, but yet, you know, we kind of like, you know, like we, with Maria, we discussed, you know, the question of marriage, right? Well, yeah, we are feminists, but we get hitched and, you know, finally ending up in church, you know, or registry office, doesn't change a thing. You know, we still believe, you know, like I think here, this is why this religion part of the video has a lot to say on this, that religion captures our affective, you know, capacity, you know, because what does it mean to believe? Like, you know, I like to refer to Spinoza, you know, it's an affect. It's an affect that gets kidnapped, you know, reopen these concepts, reclaim them, and sort of look at them critically today. So, in other words, saying goodbye to the ones that we love is the call to learn, because we need to learn this, learn how to do it, how to sort of say, how to abandon, how to forsake, literally, how to leave behind all these fancy things that we have, you know, been enamored with. I mean, she actually has this powerful, very inspiring passage. She goes, the attachment is a great fabricator of illusions. Only the ones that are detached can see the truth. Well, of course, I mean, she was also a Christian thinker, obviously, a mystic, after all, a mystic in this particular religious tradition. But, you know, I mean, we don't have to really essentially consider her a Christian thinker. She's a philosopher proper, right? She has something to say about life in general. You know, same for, I don't know, other mystic thinkers like Teresa of Avila, for instance, right? Or Catherine of Siena. There are, you know, two of the women doctors of the church, but writing very political, very feminist works, absolutely to be, again, reopened, reread, and reclaimed. You know, they don't have to be always reread in the context of the tradition they are placed in. they're right. It's like saying for the Bible. You know, it's a book after all. You know, it's like I'm kind of being Spinoza's right now. But it's a book. It's a historically compiled book. You know, and it's supposed to be read as a book. You know, also as a holy scripture. But it's a book. It's a book. The same as any other book. And it has a lot of interesting things to say about life. You know, we can learn from. A lot of absolutely disgusting and absolutely horrific, you know, things as well. But then this is what we need to learn, how to be critical, right? How to understand and how to appropriate what we can do business with and something that we should definitely disavow, you know. So that would be my call. And also this detachment has a lot to do, as you'll see in a minute, with nostalgia. So from the past to make it kind of livable for today. Now, of course, it is nostalgic in the sense that it kind of builds on certain sentiments that we create of the past. It's not the past. It never is. But it's the present day sort of sentiment, the figuration of what the past could potentially have been. You know, so the virtual is the Bergsonian cone, if you remember, right? I mean, the kind of virtual image of the past that we create always today. You know, there is no past, essentially. The past is everything that whirls like a dervish of sorts, you know, in us. That we sentimentally, for different reasons, and these reasons are important to us. Why? Why do we need nostalgia today? Why do we grow nostalgic today? You know, why? Well, because of the resources, that the resources have vanished, or maybe we are not that resourceful anymore. You know, and we have to rely on the past, you know, to gain some sort of inspiration that could sort of, you know, lead us into the future. But then again, the future will always cyclically, as we said before, return to the past and will repeat the past this way or another, right? So in this sense, and as we, as critical thinkers, we are very much future-oriented because we need to sort of sense and feel that this reality, this horrific reality, dominant reality is changing, right? The change, I mean, this is what we expect. A lot of us lives on that, right? So then again, this, I think, image, it has this sort of message of that essentially is very nostalgic. And again, the term nostalgia, by the way, that will appear and has already appeared in the title of my talk, is it's a powerful concept. It's a form of remembrance, by the way. So it's a very specific way to remember things past. You know, I mean, of course, a philosophical treatise on this is, of course, was written. I mean, it's unreadable, of course, for today's audiences. Marcel Proust, of course, remembrance of things past, right? But this is the kind of virtual image of the past, that the past cannot be said to exist, really, unless it is constantly virtualized, you know, in our everydayness. We are a virtual past right now. But this is the process that sort of nostalgically reiterates itself, if you like, right? Well, now the problem is how it is reiterated. Whether it reiterates the same, whether it is the same that returns, you know, to use Irigaray language, or there is some sort of difference there, you know, that potentially can return and be different, right? Be kind of materialized as different today. So in other words, nostalgia for me, and by the way, this film as a way to project it and capture the larger sort of spirit, the kind of Weltanschauung, if you like, a German concept for today, is exactly considered as a symptom. So it's a cultural symptomatology, so that we can be on the same page here, right? It's a cultural symptom. And as a symptom, I mean, symptom is a medical concept, right? So just to give you this brief kind of recapitulation, in medicine, we have these three kind of, right, medicine, basically Western medicine, is composed of three different, right, three different fields or realms: symptomatology, etiology, and therapeutics. Right? This is what Western medicine has been throughout the centuries, ever since Hippocrates. And interestingly enough, this level is the initial level, right? I mean, the doctors, this is what they approach. But then again, this is the ontological level, right? The level of emergence, because symptoms are events, right? They emerge, right? They're eventful. Something pops up on your body. You see that there is something that the body produces. But you cannot, at least at first sight, you cannot adjudicate, you cannot judge whether it's good or bad, right? Especially if it's something within your body, inside, right? So a good example would be cancer, right? Oncological productions, right? These are also symptoms. But basically, you know, until they get kind of recognized, we don't know, right? So in other words, why I emphasize symptoms is because they are, first of all, ontological, they concern being, and secondly, is because they cannot be morally judged, right? They are beyond good and evil, okay? Again, Nietzsche is the philosopher for this medical kind of analysis of our civilization. Beyond morality, okay? We don't know. So we don't know if we see something or something happens to us. At the we need this interval. We have grown all too habituated to judgment. Like everything goes like this. We see something and we know. Well, how do we know? Well, somehow the knowledge comes prior to, you know, us, right? This is we need this. This is what I'm appealing for right now. We need an interval. We need this symptomatological kind of dimension to kind of see something, you know, to give ourselves a minute to sense something, because before you get to name it, before you nail it down conceptually, you know, have a moment to feel it, to sense it. We need this. So it's a corporeal, it's a material, it's a very bodily level, okay? And this is how Nietzsche actually analyzes our culture. It's a corporeal symptomatology, right? Now, etiology, of course, is the realm of causes, right? But this is the level that comes with judgment, because and recognition. And therapeutics, of course, is how we deal with something, right? The remedying kind of dimension. So it's a symptom. It's a cultural symptom, and as such, it can also be considered an affect. Okay, something that we get affected by, but also something that affects us. So it goes both ways. All right. So let's. And also. Now maybe you can help me out again. What about the title? What is the message that it conveys? The title. La La Land. Yeah.
La La Land means yay, everything is okay.
Well, seemingly, but also.
The attempt to recreate the mise en scène.
Well, of course, it takes place in LA. It's LA. It's La La Land. It's the sort of, you know, everyday kind of colloquial term for LA, Los Angeles. Right?
It's a masculinity title. No.
It's a what? Sorry.
A masculinity.
Okay.
Masculinity. That is a sort of.
What do you mean?
It exudes masculinity. I don't know what you mean.
Yeah.
In what sense? I mean, in what sense can it be said to be masculine? La La Land. Well, I would rather find it, and I think
it's a kind of a fantasy too, because it says land, so it's not really.
Okay, it's like a wonderland.
It's what you
Yes.
said about
Okay.
recreating the past.
Okay.
Memory.
Yes, that's okay. Fair enough. Okay, we're on the same page. Fine. Now, okay. So yes, absolutely. But also, what is this La La? I mean, when do we use this kind of you know, communication, this mode of?
Yes, okay.
Exactly. It's infantile. it's childish, or it's like a lullaby, right? It's like la la la, but also when you keep on repeating la la la, na na na, whatever, at some point it's becoming unbearable. At least to adults,
yes.
Right? It's like a constant repetition. I mean, you've been reading Butler, right? It's like unending. It's like, yes, we're unendingly Butlerian. Like, can you please have some fresh air, in the room? So it's like a viciously repetitive cycle, right? It's like to the point of suffocation, right? It's like, okay, well, I need a break. Well, there is no break. Or the break may happen, but it may not. That's the message you get through the kind of very peculiar reading of Foucault by Butler. But then, that will come up later. So yes, it's repetitive, it's iterative, it's unbearable at some point. And yet, it's like a trance, right? It's like a kind of. So in other words, I think what changes here is also, given that this is an hymn to the postmodern era, the era of freedom of sorts, and also you remember the powerful sort of quote from it. How can you be a revolutionary if you're such a traditionalist? And I find it so symptomatic. It also speaks to my first argument, learning how to say goodbye to the ones that we know. I hope you see the connection here, right? How can we consider ourselves revolutionary, right, critical thinkers, if we stick with the past, if we still we still fall in love with these, horrific, that yet looking so, how to put it, nice and lovely, elements of the dominant culture, right? Well, then how do you do this? How do you kind of account for your own position in it? So in other words, we could rephrase it by saying like, are we really innovative? Like, well, what does it mean? Like, what do we contribute? How do we live our life differently? I mean, this is the concept that I'm getting at. Difference. What does it actually mean? Right? Is it still the pejorated difference, that is to say, the different from, that means inevitably less than, the dialectical difference, okay, the negative difference? Or can it ever be affirmative, but authentically affirmative? Like the symptomatologically affirmative. Can we culturally, civilizationally, personally, collectively learn how to experience difference affirmatively? That is to say, as a genuine change and transformation? Or is transformation going to have to always be entrapped within this vicious cycle of endless repetition of the negative? Is this something that culturally somehow curtails us and limits our also intellectual capacities? Right? By the way, it actually has a lot of these intertextual kind of connections present, also alluding to Polanski's Rosemary's Baby. Well, after all, I mean, we're talking about cultural sexual revolutions of the 1960s, right? In the United States, capturing, I mean, this was an absolute masterpiece and revelational in many ways. After all, this is where the Satan was born, in the 60s, right? And has stayed with us until today, right? And that was the kind of Hollywood rendering of the birth of the Satan, right? The Satan that demolished our civilizational, that put an end, literally, to our civilizational beliefs and assumptions, right? Our civilization becoming more and more devilish, So that, of course, keeps coming back these days, especially in different discourses of post-secularism. The ones that try to, again, reclaim the values, the fundamentals, right? Of course, again, Christian values, Catholic values, Protestant or whatever sort of variation are absolutely to be rescued and retrieved and sort of revived. So again, the musical theme, I mean, composed by Krzysztof Komeda, with whom Polanski had cooperated for such a long time, captures, again, this very kind of interesting, kind of, how to put it, nightmarish in many ways, kind of infernal, serial sort of repetition that we have talked about. And this is something, I mean, it's hard to kind of interpret the musical theme itself. And it actually is innovative in many ways, because it's neither metaphorical. It's not metonymical, but it's serial. You know, and this is exactly what postmodernism will absolutely run with. You know, seriality. And we are absolutely offspring to the serial culture, you know, with the prominence of Netflix TV series, you know, or whatever kind of series. I mean, we have again become enamored with series of different kinds, you know, telenovelas, right? I mean, yet another example, series, you know. Yes, this is the dominant kind of mode of existence we have enjoyed and we have kind of liked for quite some time already, you know, and this is also the mode we get habituated to our existence, you know, through series, right? It's serial. So what is a series? Mathematically, after all, series is a mathematical figure. It's an operation, right? What is a series? Well, it's a sequence, but a very specific type of sequence. It's a variation with little difference, right? So it's like you kind of do the same thing on and on all the time, but slightly different, right? So there is a modicum of difference injected here and there, just not to let us get all too bored, right? Okay. So and again, I mean, going back to the musical kind of theme of jazz. I mean, we have a jazz expert here, so I'll give the floor entirely to you. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure you'll agree with that. That basically jazz is about the future. I mean, jazz is about like opening up, creating new musical spaces, right? By intermingling, by bringing together different sort of elements together. Something that would normally not come to pass, right? Am I right? Am I not?
She's thinking.
it's also quite symptomatic.
It depends on what you're saying next.
What am I? Okay. All right. So let's go to the next point, and then we can talk. All right. So, but definitely, jazz is one of the contributions that jazz made to culture in general, not only to American culture, is to actually have expressed this, I mean, basically this natural diversity of sounds, of colors, of modes of reception, of modes of composing, of, I mean, this is really an art, not of diversity, but an art in diversity. So am I now moving in the right direction? Fine. All right, well, let's see. We need that. We need legitimation, right? From experts. Yes, we need that. Oh, yes, that's part of the patriarchal legacy. We need to be reasserted. Yes, I am right because, you know, the professor actually, you know, confirmed and said yes to the dress, right? All right. So now let's move on. Well, this is our star. Well, she's grown to. I mean, inevitably, she's grown. I mean, feminism is no different, right? And feminism as a field of academic study is also is not free from these dominant processes. You know, I mean, processes concerning becoming famous, right? Becoming popular. I mean, there are a lot of thinkers in this world, right? There is that. So many, all too many, potentially. And yet, you know, we have, again, this is part of the patriarchal kind of fetishistic tendency, right? To fetishize people, to fetishize goods, to fetishize services, to fetishize yourself. I mean, after all, we're living in the age of, you know, selfie fetishism, so we prefer our own imageries than ourselves. You know, we have totally, I mean, we're living in a total schism from ourselves. So, yes, she is. She has become one of these. She is famous for organizing these annual kind of workshops, if you like, seminars. She calls them that she supervises. I mean, and that these are very exclusive and exquisite groupings. She organizes these seminars annually in Paris. I mean, and the way it is managed is she basically. Well, the message is sent out, of course, around, but then the kind of way of submitting applications is quite nostalgic, in a sense that she actually invites students, and graduate students, obviously, not undergrad, obviously, that's important, graduate students, I mean master students or PhD students, to submit their applications and a huge portfolio. I mean, you have to submit, I think, up to 3 of your publications and the very concrete research proposal, and you have to print this out and submit it to her Paris domicile in an envelope. So, you know, this is the way she does it. She deals with it. So basically, she goes through these applications by herself, and she selects. She's highly selective. So not very many people, you know, get a chance to meet her in person. She also has this very specific aura that she exudes. I mean, she likes to be treated in a very regal fashion. So it's an interesting persona also that she projects socially. I got a chance myself to see her speak and lecture 3 times. And she is, I remember the one, just briefly, I went to Trieste, the northern part of Italy, and then she was invited as a keynote speaker. And that was an international conference, a kind of intimate conference. And she arrived, and she went up to the podium, and she said, I remember these few words in English, that she's not in the mood of speaking English today, so she'll be speaking in Italian. And she did, to the dismay of 90% of people. So that was fine, and that's what she has grown famous for. So quite a woman, quite a personality, quite how to put it. Well, a political philosopher herself. Okay, so let's move on. Now, finally, to the gist of this meeting, nostalgia. So for us to be able to sort of understand, first of all, my argument for nostalgia, and to sort of situate, contextualize this in the larger context of my sort of quasi-lecture dedicated to the thought and writings of Irigaray, is to retrieve the etymology of the term, okay, that I really need here for political and ethical reasons. Well, of course, it comes from a Greek term, nostalgia, which, as you see on the slide here, it combines 2 words, nostos and algos, I'm sorry, nostos and algos, or algia. Whereas nostos literally means return home, or homecoming, and algos means pain, grief, but algia, interestingly enough, something's not on board, I think, algia stands for yearning. A powerful yearning. It's not an instinct, it's a yearning, it's a languishing, okay? So it's a desire. In other words, it's a desire. Yes, a longing, yeah, absolutely, yes, a longing for it. So in other words, nostalgia, of course, and the dominant way we know nostalgia, conceptually, of course, and in a scholarly context, is homesickness, okay? Yes?
It's a great definition for jazz music.
You mean
language of freedom in the time of nostalgia?
Is it?
Yes.
Well, that was unintended, but thank you. That was unintended, but I'll keep that in mind, because actually that made me think instantly of something.
Maybe you're only thinking European jazz.
Yes. Mythological tales, or also literary, you know, they actually, and especially under patriarchy, they have this nostalgic kind of theme ingrained in them. So, like the stories of Odysseus, right? You know, returning home, right? And that's the main kind of narrative there. And of course, the wailing of Penelope, of course, the unending wailing wife, right? Abraham, and speaking from also yet another pillar of our Western civilization, that is the Jewish, Judeo kind of legacy inherent, right? But then with the Abrahamic story, you know, it's an interesting thing because it's been like this forever, right? I mean, Jewish culture is a diasporic culture, essentially, right? So it's an interesting story of a kind of you know, alliance between God and Abrahamic community that eventually promises Canaan, right? Promises home, but oddly, the Jews have never returned home, right? Because ultimately, home is God, right? So this is the twist, and then again, hence the Jewish, you know, essentially nostalgic, incrementally again nostalgic nature. Now, some women throwing in to the picture. Well, Dorothy, of course, right? The Wizard of Oz. But you recall how she kind of started this journey of going back home? Anybody remember? Well, she was literally blown away.
Yes.
By the tornado, right? So she was uprooted, right, from home, right? She was taken out of her home violently, right, by force of nature, right? And then thrown out miles and miles away. And then, of course, interestingly enough, the story is it's becoming more and more patriarchal, right? Because then she ends up meeting these idiots, mad idiots, you know, like totally precluding her from an effective journey back home. And she ends up assisting them, you know, she facilitates them to grow and develop and learn something about themselves, right? First, and a woman has to always first help men to, you know themselves who they really are, and then she may some spare time left, you know, for her.
Yeah, but they are portraying very idiotic way.
Yeah, they're idiots, right?
Ineffective in their pursuits, so it's...
Exactly. And finally, a good example here, finally more affirmative and more hopeful, comes with Alice, of course, of Wonderland, you know, and she has to actually go into Wonderland of herself. I mean, there is an interesting essay by Irigaray, by the way, on the other side of the mirror, that actually deals with the sequel, not with the prequel of Lewis Carroll, but the sequel, and she gives a perfect kind of interpretation of it. I truly recommend this. So Alice of Wonderland, and then again, returning as the force of life. You know, this is the Nietzschean legacy there. You know, in Lewis Carroll's book, you know, that you never, I mean, the interesting take on returning is that to see that you do not return to anywhere. Because life is returning. Life is always kind of moving on dynamically, you know, returning to yourself. Well, you know, an obvious question that Derrida had asked so many times, you know, like, how do you know that you're going to wake up tomorrow as you? How do you know this? How do you know it today? You know? So again, the question and the sort of essence, the force of life is anticipation, right? You somehow oddly anticipate that you'll be you tomorrow, or you'll be what you consider you to be in 2 hours from now, right? But how do you know what this you is? What is this you? Kind of enigmatic pronoun, you know, that you kind of appropriate to yourself, right? So this is, and now finally, something that I need to emphasize at this point is, of course, freedom. I mean, an absolutely fundamental notion we've addressed and used here already several times. I want to focus on and retrieve the forgotten term, again, the Greek term, the name for freedom, eleutheria, from eleu and eran. You have the translations here. Again, eleu, arrive, and eran, where one loves. And of course, here, nostalgia and eleutheria, and freedom, converge, obviously, because where one loves is home in our culture, right? Because you feel yourself at home, right? You feel okay, right? So again, as a metaphor or as a metonymy, doesn't matter. So in that sense, it's as I put it here, fulfillment of one's love as the end of a trip, right? So you know the story. I mean, Hollywood, mainstream Hollywood pictures is all about it, right? Of course, it's a patriarchal story. The kind of, you know, read through psychoanalysis, of course, the Oedipus complex, right? Men have to be set on a journey to resolve this complex, right? To return oddly to themselves, right? Fighting, of course, the villains, fighting the catastrophes and so on, and bringing back peace into the world, and finally getting a prize, of course, in the figure of a woman, right? Obviously, the heterosexual romance in place. So I need this to sort of emphasize again the connection, and also emphasize the dimension of space. Okay, and I think these concepts, nostalgia, eleutheria, freedom, in other words, they are spatial concepts. That is to say, that by emphasizing and placing emphasis on the dimension of space, and home, literally, they kind of express, okay, the place we are in, okay, and also us, okay, because we are also spatial beings, as embodied beings, right? We are in place and in space, okay, and our identity, our sense of self is always embedded, okay? It's embodied, but being embodied means that you're embedded. It's like Virginia Woolf's, right? You flow, but you're rooted, right? So the rootedness, in that sense, okay, is necessary. I mean, you cannot flow through life. You know, I mean, we can observe this today in Europe through the fate of immigrants, right? Yes, they are also, they set themselves on a journey, right? End up miserably, obviously, as uninvited others, right? Obviously treated ruthlessly, put in camps as aliens, and this is a good example of how, you know, you can, I mean, life lived as dynamically, and you cannot be a migrant all your life. It's not sustainable. No one would survive this. Okay, you can survive this for, I don't know, half a year maybe, okay? But it's not sustainable. So yes, we need rootedness. We need roots. I mean, roots are not bad, okay? And roots do not have to be fundamental values, okay? Like we have tended to believe in, as from Plato onwards, okay? But we need to attach ourselves to, spatially, okay? To make our life sustainable. Otherwise, we're not, I mean, can you think of being a politically informed or motivated thinker, having hardly anything to eat? Okay? Well, of course, I'm asking naive questions, but these are exactly the questions we need today. You know, if we want to change the world, well, we need to live sustainably. You know, yes, if you look back at the way different philosophers, artists, painters, musicians, and so on and so forth had to live, you know, well, we come little by little to understand the sacrifice, right? Luce Irigaray, you know, as a homecoming activity, okay? Not only for women, but for everybody, you know, because it's not gender kind of limited or delimited, okay? It's like an invitation to come back to who you've always been, okay? To feel finally you, right? Both symbolically and materially, okay? And not be a semblance, as she will put it, of the dominant painter. The Jewish, the Abrahamic community starts from bondage. This is our initial condition. You know, we start negatively, okay, as prisoners. Also, by the way, I'm getting there, but I'll you know, divulge this right now. Also, Heidegger, in his analysis of language, he will speak of language as the house of bondage. You know, reading it critically through the biblical story. The house of bondage, language as a house of bondage. What does it mean? I mean, this is the legacy of the negative, right? Again, of the negative. That you always, well, I mean, this is really ingrained in the Aristotelian syllogistic logics, okay, and also rejuvenated via Hegel's dialectic, right? It's I'm getting there in a minute, so it's going to become clearer, I hope. So now, if we trace the etymological and genealogical kind of sort of roots of the term, well, freedom, interestingly enough, you know, century of the present era, the Caesar Constantine actually established Sunday as the first day of the week. right? The day of God, dedicated to the divine, right? One of the first Christian Caesars. So it was like that. I mean, it was a process, and it was linguistically established, right? So here again, now compared with right. So the negativity of freedom, right? In a sense that the freedom gets inflected through liberty, okay, and then it essentially becomes derivative. Okay, you need to. Why would anyone fight for freedom? Aren't you born free? Are you or are you not? Do you feel free, or do we feel oppressed? Is the critical tradition also? I mean, the critical tradition is also burdened with this negativity, because this is how it is considered within. That is to say, I mean, we have to ask this again. Initial question: why would we need to? Why would we have to fight for freedom in the first place? Isn't freedom something you are?
We are bound by laws.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and then all of these different kind of boxes, if you like, they oppress us, right? They curtail and demarcate our boundaries, basically, right?
They also give us some guidance.
Well, they may, but they do not.
But it's not just the sense of oppression, as you are saying.
Well, this is always.
Because the constitutes always some subjects.
Yes.
You know, I'm thinking about background ideas about that we are constituted as subjects by our connections to law and to those sort of regime and phrases. And
right.
So
well, it's always about the boundaries. This is what boundaries are for. You know, they are limits, right? But then limits. You remember again the Latin term, limes, right? Also recalling Aristotelian concept of the end. I mean, Aristotle's concept of the end actually expresses threshold. It's not the end. It's one of the many ends, right? There is no end, real, one. You know, this is a human anthropocentric imaginary, you know, that makes us think that there is the end to life, okay? So in that sense, yes, it kind of, you know, I mean, this is the best, I think, way to envisage this is to actually, okay, well, what would you say, let me put it that way, what would you say if you were tied up to a chair? What would you want? What would your desire be? Well, aside from the ones that are perverted, right? Yeah, because there are people who like and enjoy. You know,
not all day long.
Yeah, well, to use Lacan as Irigaray does in an adult, mature way would be yes. We have been like this, but it's an infantile. It's a childish, unfortunately, very infelicitous sort of stage of our life. But growing up and learning and getting to know about the world is necessitates this move. To break away from it.
I was even thinking in a larger scale, you know, and I'm thinking about what it says that there are people who are more recognized, more intelligible, they become intelligible to others than the ones who are not.
That's judgmental. Like, what does it mean?
From some rights in a way.
Well, Butler is a rationalist thinker, after all. And she, you know, I have to admit this. And also, you know, well, she is also a Hegelian Kojèvian thinker. And for her, recognition is an absolutely politically necessary concept. You know, why? I mean, this is what she's been writing. You know, very much endorsing different minority struggle for recognition, because this is the way you get to appear. This is also very much in keeping with of meanings, basically, that this English verb has. So what does it denote? Can you enlist? Can you throw in to the air some act? Okay. Yeah. Okay, I agree with that. That's a different one. Okay. What else?
The appearances, I don't know if it's connected or surface.
Yeah, definitely. Appear, yeah. I would agree with that. Yeah. I mean, you can look it up in a dictionary, in fact. But I need us to visibilize this, put it on board, literally. What else?
Can it be related to the audience? Will it perform for others?
Okay, so how would we render this in English then?
Because it's implied in acting as well.
Yeah, it is. I think it's the you know, I mean, whatever
Play.
it's social or theatrical.
Play.
Yeah,
Play, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Play, and play is different from act because play is more like, I would say, innocent, right? I mean, we don't need a script for playing, do we? Right? We need a script for acting, right? Not always, it's not again obligatory, but this is basically the difference, right?
But
I mean,
the first term that is associated with performance now in the English language is none of that.
On the job or at school, this is what you're expected of, right? You have to prove that you have learned something, right? You have to say it. You have to make it audible, right? You have to make it heard. And you have to be verified. You have to be checked, literally, by the one who is considered more knowledgeable to, again, you know, prove you right, right? To sort of reassert that what you know is the right type of knowledge, right? So performance here expresses a whole range of different sort of meanings that at the end of the day they kind of converge, right? Because the effect is important, right? And this is where the Butlerian contribution comes into the picture. I hope you see it, right? This sort of the signing off, you know, to put it differently. The stamp, you know, the recognition, in fact, you know. The one that recognizes you, that gives you the right to exist, okay? Like in the context of, I don't know, minority studies, right? The ones that say that, yes, we recognize you, that means that we grant you the rights to be there, along with us, okay? Have the rights to do this and that. But this is not freedom, okay? And this is what I need you to remember. This can be felt as freedom, but this is liberty, okay? You fight for liberty. And this is also where the demarcation line comes right up between the Beauvoirian feminism and Irigarayan feminism, between equality and difference, okay? So equality, you've read the essay, the very brief short essay, like the response to the Beauvoir, right, and her legacy. Why would women, why would we, why would anyone fight to be equal to men? Right, in her very ironically titled essay, equal to whom? Like, excuse me, I mean, like, who do you want to be really equal to? You know, the to is important, the preposition here, you know. Because to be equal, equality is like, you know, an empty Platonic ideal, right? And as an ideal, we get a lesson from one of the harshest critics of Plato, and that would be, of course, Fyodor Dostoevsky, who says, I love quoting him, ideals are cruel. Full stop. Right? Would you want to put yourself through such a nightmarish process to attain a kind of blurry, you know, but yet so enticing ideal? You know, you would like to aspire to by sacrificing your life to it? That's pretty ridiculous. Unless you want this theater of cruelty. Sounds Aristotelian, but has nothing to do with that. You know, that's the point. You know, equality doesn't exist in this world. It cannot be said to exist. To put it more, you know, like in a structuralist and post-structuralist fashion. Language comes right up, right? Equality cannot be said to exist because it totally contradicts. It negates diversity. It negates difference. You know, you cannot, like, put these terms together. They're like polarities, total polarized oppositions. Two different galaxies, right? And the Beauvoir offers a feminism of equality, right? This is what the second sex is about. It's about how women should. There is a moral obligation on the part of women. Women should wear trousers. Women should do men's professions. Women eventually, and this is quite striking, to
to actually read de Beauvoir, appreciating killing life over bearing life. You know, it's kind of mind-blowing hearing this from a feminist philosopher. You know, but this is what fight for equality assumes naturally and logically. Okay, whereas the struggle for difference is a totally different struggle, different type of struggle. Okay, this is like a homecoming. You little by little come back to yourself, learning to be at ease with yourself, to appreciate yourself as you. And whoever this you want to be, doesn't matter. You can rely on the established categories. You can sort of appreciate yourself as a woman, but you can appreciate yourself as a cosmic difference. You know, and you can parade, yeah, and go Butlerian. You can parade whenever you leave your house, play, you know, perform. No one will never know. No one will ever know. You know, because this is the kind of, if you play this game right, you will always come out winner. You know, because this is the strength, the power of creation that lies within difference. You know. And this makes you finally kind of feel at ease with the difference that you are, essentially. And not the difference that other people want you to be or assume, you know. Well, let them do their job. Well, let them consider me whoever and whatever they want. I have no influence on this anyway. Why would I struggle with this? You know. I come out as me. And then people will never know. You know, we have invested, as Lise Gross says, all too much, civilizationally and philosophically, in the development of epistemology, totally forgetting ontology in this. And Irigaray will be one of the first, actually, of the 20th century thinkers who will follow Heidegger's kind of emphasis on metaphysics, or a rediscovery of metaphysics, that is to say, of course, the discourse of ontology. And yes, sexual difference will be considered, because that means that you abdicate your own sort of power, not the right, but power to feel happy, to be happy as who you are. No, always, you know, this is the legacy, Hegelian legacy. This is also the American context that is very much capitalist, and of course capitalism is a social business. If you want to do business, you have to do business with people. And if you want to drag people into your business, well then you have to compromise, right? You have to play alone. You cannot just take your own kind of conditions and then, I don't know, deal with that, right? It's not the kind of historical, geographical, and philosophical context. And Butler is part of that context, very pragmatist. Also, by the way, pragmatism from Latin means to be versed in affairs, right? To be skillful in dealing with people, right? Affairs. Business with people. So if you want to do business with someone, well, you have to, well, you know, make some compromises, right? So you can do this, someone will do that, you know, you play alone. But it always necessitates a compromise. Well, with Irigaray, there is no compromise, okay? We have compromised all too much, to the extent that women have been compromised culturally and civilizationally. Hence, she gives the example, of course, of Socrates' Antigone, right? The one buried alive, the kind of prototypical figure of a woman living under patriarchy. The one buried alive, banging on the patriarchy's door and asking for permission to be admitted in. Why? She poses this question on and on. You know, this is like a living corpse. This is the state of femininity under patriarchy. Living corpses, walking corpses. And hence, the non-existence of sexual difference. Under patriarchy, sexual difference cannot be said to exist. There has not been sexual difference. There has been, as she likes to put it, monosexual system. Are we still good in terms of time? So.
Yeah, we can break if you want.
Yeah.
If you want, we can make some break. Let me break.
Okay, up to you. If you need a break, you can stop here.
Yeah, we need a break.
That's enthusiastic.
I'm used to, but I could do it. Yeah, we could do a break. Okay. All right, let's do break. Let's do break then. Is it? Okay. 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay.
See you.
So, thank you.
Barulhinho.
Este parou. You need some water? Do you have water?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Yeah.
Olha. Chegou.
O que é que chegou?
A caverna do Platão.
Ah,
É, ó.
certo. Então. Voltamos já.
Minha parolice. Tô sem voz. Eu tô sem voz por ele.
Mas isso não é voz.
I do.
As 3 pessoas. Mas isso fica guardado.
Some water.
Joana, onde tu vais?
WC, queres alguma coisa?
No WC não.
Mas queres lá abaixo? O que é que queres?
Uma comida qualquer.
O que é que queres?
Uma água. E uma comida qualquer.
Um chocolate?
Não, mais salgado.
Salgado?
Pode ser daqueles pães ruins mesmo. Sei lá. Eu vou pegar um papel pra ti. Eu vou pegar papel. Vou pegar papel.
Isso eu acho.
Ah, pois é.
Quando eu faço a
Eu já ia
eu só esqueci aqui, gajo. Fala muito rápido. Tem horas que eu só pego aqui o senhor professor gajo. Ele fala muito rápido. Às vezes eu fico viajando. Mas eu só estou a tirar apontamentos daquilo que me interessa. A mim, mas tudo nos interessa. Porque eu não consigo tirar de tudo. Tenho as coisas.
Olha, se eu tivesse combinado hoje por si. Não, amanhã. Eu não estou a boca lá ficar. Nunca. Quer ficar? Ah, eu não venho comigo. Eu venho depois.
Ele vai no 7º slide de 50.
Por isso é que. E ele disse a professora que me disse, quando eu 5 minutos ao par. Eu quero 45 minutos ao par. Eu quero 45 minutos ao par. Ele me disse, mas está de acordo, 45 minutos ao par. Mas ele está algumas coisas. Ele percebe algumas coisas. Eu não gostei da cena do Lalá. Não gostei. Não, mas
Ele foi buscar o bem. Depois vou lá a seguir.
sim, mas não achei que tivesse sido coisa. Não, o que eu quero é falar da diferença de educação do ano igual à tarde. O ciclo é sempre igual, mas há possibilidade de ser possível. Será que nós aqui vamos voltar ao mesmo ciclo e pensar que mas o nosso plano de voltar é que era o ciclo e depois. Ah, lá, vem aqui esta. Não, querido, até lá embaixo. Olha, eu ali depois andei aqui. Suporte mais. Depois fui para a sala assim, mais. Acho que esse telemóvel dá meu cu, olha. Eu gosto muito de mais. Mas o que eu estou a 2 minutos de ficar com ele. Eu quero que eu prenda primeiro o peixe dele. Está a vender o peixe dele. Temos 2 minutos de ficar. Mas primeiro tem que vender o peixe todo. O que eu percebo é que a verdadeira liberdade é coincidir com si próprio. E não ser homem. Não é? A liberdade é sermos iguais aos homens. Certo, é verdade, não é? Porque uma coisa é a liberdade. No final de várias definições. O que é ser livre? Não é ser livre. Ser livre é voltar a casa, voltar a si próprio. Ou ser livre é quebrar com as barreiras todas, e ser contra os homens, e ser contra a coisa, e ser contra. Não. Ser livre, no sentido grego da palavra, é retornar a si própria, à sua própria natureza. Isto tem riscos complicados. É no seu sentido. São razões femininas, não é? Um é a performance, ser livre, ou seja, o sexo não significa nada. Ser nascer mulher ou nascer homem, o que interessa é a maneira como a gente performa, a maneira como a gente age.
Mas ele está a dizer o oposto.
Ele está a dizer o oposto, e isso é que eu vou ficar com ele. Está a dizer o oposto?
O oposto, olha, eu não entendi alguma coisa. Vai dar
Não.
Eu caindo aqui pro lado bonito.
Quem
Exagerado.
faz que ele vai fazer a expressão boca a boca, não sou eu.
Eu não me importava. Não me importava.
a gente abrir isto.
Bem, mas então, está a ver, eu dizer
Não afeta.
que há aqui duas perspectivas do feminismo, hoje, contemporâneo.
Eu dei a Butler, não ficou nervoso.
Mas eu estou 2 minutos para bater com ele.
Pois.
Mas eu quero primeiro que ele venda a conversa toda dele. Ele vai vender a próxima. Quando não quer, não quer.
Ele se estica ao comprido.
Tem que esticar tudo. Tudo? O que a gente deixa esticar, vai. Precisa esticar tudo.
Tudo. Deixa eu só conferir se a gente está sendo transmitido. Não, não está.
Vai, só faltava.
É assim, se nós voltarmos para nós próprios, quer dizer, qual é o reflexo em termos
Perfect. All right, so
3, 2,
folks, bear with me, please, for another around hour, and I hope I won't bore you to death.
Not to take pictures by the.
All right, are we in? Okay. So yeah, I hope I'm not going to bore you to death. We'll leave this place still alive. But if you feel like sharing your thoughts, you're always most welcome. All right. So here, right. So again, Irigaray's, Irigaray herself is a trained linguist. I mean, she obtained a degree in linguistics. Okay, that's her first degree, a PhD degree. She couldn't complete, in fact, she couldn't accomplish her originally first doctoral dissertation that was published a few years later under the title The Speculum of the Other Woman, which is, again, a kind of wobbly ground because there was, again, until today, not the perfect rendering, English rendering of the French title, Le Speculum de l'autre femme, and that was kind of, you know, I mean, commas were placed in between. That was the kind of political message she wanted to send out. But that thesis, that dissertation, never got defended. Irigaray got expelled from École Freudienne, run by Jacques Lacan back in the 70s. So that's what happened back then. And she went through a lot. And the main kind of axis of differentiation and conflict between her and Lacan was exactly her main claim, with which Jacques Lacan could not cope with, literally, essentially, because Irigaray basically started by claiming in the opening passage of her speculum that a woman is an ontologically different being with her own idiosyncratic desire. Okay? And it was as simple as that. And of course, for Jacques Lacan, desire was structurally masculine. Okay? And that was basically how their paths kind of parted. So here, I mean, Speculum is a collection of different philosophical essays. Essays that Irigaray herself likes to call flirts or romances. She uses this specifically feminine, of course, under patriarchy strategy, flirting, seducing, romancing, in a strategically feminist political way. She romances, as she puts it herself, male philosophers to accomplish what she wants. She makes of them puppets, literally. It's like a puppeteering show, you know. So she's definitely mastered in this art. So out of Plato's cave, well, of course, it can be read literally, metaphorically, metonymically, the way you like. But of course, the message here is, and here you have, of course, read it the way you like, but it's actually an image of the Utrova cave in the southeastern region of Bulgaria. Literally, of course, the philosophy is the way you come to acquire knowledge of male philosophers throughout centuries and their books. You know, this is not really philosophy, right? Plus, not to mention that, the contemporary French philosopher François Laruelle, an interesting philosopher himself, observes that Western philosophy is a contradiction in terms. That philosophy is a very judgmental discipline. Because philosophy always claiming to sort of aspire towards wisdom is like you have to somehow know a priori that wisdom exists, right? To aspire to. But how do you know this? How do you know that something like a wisdom exists? Like, what is this wisdom really, right? Philosophy for Laruelle is the art of Hermes. Like, if there is a god that it sort of captures the sense, the spirit, the fleshiness of philosophy, that would be the Greek patron saint of the merchants, right? The ones very socially present, travelers, voyagers, into men and women. I mean, different bodies. Well, here a caveat is necessary that also has come already with transgender and intersexual people, you know, saying, and transsexual people as well, saying that, okay, what about us? And what about hermaphrodites? Where are we in this picture? Okay, you talk about men and women, I mean sexually embodied, right? What about like people who are hermaphrodites? Like where do we fall in this sort of chart? Well, and then yes, we have an aporia, we have an aporetic moment. But then I think it comes all too early to resolve the problem here. Irigaray will respond to this in a way that that she will say that recognition of sexual differences is the necessary first step. Okay, necessary first step to recognize more differences there. Okay, we have to first acknowledge women as different because they have participated and will participate, you know, in the process of production, procreation of life, you know, and this is, so they have to be acknowledged first, because they are the prerequisite, the sine qua non condition, okay? If the second element in this game of reproduction is not appropriately acknowledged as different, well then no other difference will ever emerge, okay, affirmatively, okay? So that sexual difference is a threshold, okay, it's a threshold through which everybody has to pass. Right, and then again, she says that this is our responsibility, this is our imperative. Our era will be kind of, obligated to resolve this. And to sort of appropriately recognize the difference between men and women. So, of course, under Western patriarchy, the entire knowledge of a woman has always been created and propagated by men. Well, all what women have known about themselves was men produced, right? So it's a virtual feminine or eternal feminine. I mean, the image that Nietzsche, for instance, proposes, right? The eternal femininity, the femininity that has never had anything to do with actual, you know, flesh and blood women. It was a male projection. It was a male imaginary, you know, what men have thought of women, right? So, as Irigaray will say, it's a specularized, it's an image, right? A woman, a femininity is an image created by man. And also, of course, commodified, obviously, right? So now, let's make it more specific. So, what do we have to do? Well, first of all, she actually enlists a set of steps. And she does it with the acknowledgement of language. I mean, that all we do is talking, is writing, is language-based, okay? So we have to acknowledge the place of language in this enterprise, okay? Because even the concept, I mean, the terms we use are language-based and rooted. So in that sense, right, emphasis on the unspoken gendered subject position. Because femininity has been, for centuries, an unspoken gendered position, right? And women have not been given the right to speak, right? To develop any knowledge of themselves. I mind you that the women have been excluded from formal education, that is to say, universities, and the first university being established when? 11th century, right, in Bologna, in Europe. Of course, there had been universities established even earlier, for instance, in different Islamic cultures, right? But of course, it's unacknowledged. We don't like to think about it, right? We prefer not to. And then again, for over 7 centuries, women were excluded from this formal education, totally excluded, right? And then again, the first university in Europe that actually let women in was the university in Zurich. But then again, it was back in it was 1867, so half of the 19th century, and basically women were allowed to sit and audit. So of course, women were not given the full right of being students. They could not, you know, be students literally, full right, right? It took much more time for women to actually fight for this equal kind of right to education. Right, so I think this is all what we have already addressed. So I'm moving on to the obvious, but now I think we do need a word on that. So of course, why writing? And this is also what Irigaray emphasizes a lot. So, well, because the written word, a word in general, in our Western tradition, here you have the of course, Christian legacy. Well, has been, you know, over the centuries, fetishized, literally, right? I mean, and fetishized in both senses of the term. The anthropological sense, which is, I mean, this is the term fetish. By the way, are you aware that this is actually one of these few words that actually derive from Portuguese, from feito? Right, that's the root term for fetish. That is to say something accomplished, right? Done. So it's past participle, right? So it's something accomplished. And on anthropological account, a fetish is a divine trace on earth, right? So it can be different things. It can be, I don't know, a black stone. It can be whatever. It can be a cross. It can be you know, relic. It can be a blood sample, you know, of a holy man. It can be anything. It can be an obelisk, you know. It can be an agora, whatever. I mean, this is really a social contract, right? But usually, a fetish, and that would be Freud, that gives us a clear reading of it, is oftentimes, unfortunately and cruelly, connected with a sacrifice, a sacrificial offering. So someone has to be killed to be fetishized, okay? Sacrificed. It's like the story of patriarchy, Western patriarchy, right? I mean, it starts with the killing of the father, right? The father who has been murdered, right? And this is how he ends up extrapolated. He ends up catapulted into the realm of the extraworldly, right? And he becomes God, the inaccessible God, right? Forever, as the progenitor. Yes, but it all starts with a murder. Patriarchy is a culture of mourning. It's a culture of mourning. It's a mournful culture. Men, sons that can only come to love their fathers, well, upon his death. That's the story I think we all know, right? Men cannot find it easy to actually develop a loving relationship with their fathers until his death. And miraculously, once he's gone, he's the beloved father, you know, that men will, you know, dedicate the rest of their life to find again, you know, to return to. So this is it. This is how it goes. The sacrificial economy of the patriarchal system. So here you have a perfect example. And the second, by the way, the second meaning of the term fetish is a clinical meaning. So of course we're talking about the discourse of psychiatry and psychology and metapsychology to be precise. And then of course we're talking about the clinical level. So that means that you can only attain sexual satisfaction with the presence, doesn't have to be physical presence, but it can be a mental, right, projection of a certain object, right? So in other words, you know, unfortunately ours is a culture that we have all the right to say that sex is dead, literally. You know, because then again, we don't really know who men have sex with, really, when they have sex with women. You know, this is how it goes. So yes, that's the fetishistic legacy there. And this is, I mean, we're all messed up. So, but we find it difficult to admit this and deal with this properly. So with our own conditions, so we don't know how to deal with this. It creates anxiety. So we'd rather stay away, you know, and we'd rather run away, and we'd rather cover it up with some illusions and phantasmagorias, you know, that we can play with, you know, because it's easy. And this is the problem. So here in the opening words of the Bible, you get to read this, right? So the capitalized words, the Word and God. So of course, eventually it's a syllogistic way of phrasing. It's a repetitive, again, very performative, you know. It's reiterative, you know, to make all the pagans, you know, read and understand this. It's like a mantra, you know. It's a serial way of argumenting. And eventually the Word was God, you know. So eventually you get to understand, if you read it properly, that ours is a culture that defies word, okay, in all possible forms. And given that it was men in our culture that, well, have always taken care of the word through writing, through speaking, and so on, well, you get to understand the power of writing and the power of word as such, right? Rapidly, it's a logocentric tradition, right? As Irigaray will, well, she will actually add this prefix of phallogocentric, but that comes right after. So logocentric means that the logos, the word, knowledge, everything that word can produce is at the very center, right? So a logocentric legacy, and interestingly enough, as you can see, this is basically the kind of theory of logos developed in the antiquity by already Socrates. So logos is to be listened to. I mind you that, for instance, according to, and you probably remember, that Socrates was the philosopher who actually considered philosophy to be the art of midwifery, right? So you assist, you are there for other people, right? And his was the method to learn through, well, a very negative kind of technique, right? Because that was called a lengthic method or ironic. So basically asking people simple questions, very simple, that simple that they can actually no longer tell. They can no longer answer these questions, right? And this is for Socrates the condition to actually start learning, okay? Start building knowledge, okay? Because, and this is the difference Socrates establishes between opinion and knowledge, right? So basically you have to expose people's ignorance, okay? That what you believe in is a set of some sort of taken for granted assumptions and opinions, right? You need to get rid of all of this, all the illusions, to start building a proper knowledge. Also, this is part of the feminist epistemology, you know. Rarely acknowledge that it's there. You know, we have to abandon all the things that we, well, again, have loved, you know, for centuries. We have mistaken for our identity, right? And start building a new, properly woman's knowledge, right? Logos is to be listened to, okay? So it's an art of conversation. Philosophy for Socrates, if you probably remember, was not supposed to be written down. Philosophy was the art of conversation, right? But Plato, of course, wanting to register, right, and record for generations to come the wisdom of Socrates, of course, this is what he contributed, and this is how philosophy gets to develop in the Western culture of science, right? Bestows understanding as it is reason, of course, so the rational comes in and connects people. So, of course, the communication happens logically. And this is, again, this is the Platonic legacy. If I say apple, of course, you understand me because you have an idea of apple in your heads, right? Of course, if you were to draw this apple, I'm sure there would be totally different apples all around, but somehow, miraculously, we can communicate, right? So yes, in that sense, as Irigaray will say, yes, we are virtually Platonic. We have never surpassed Plato's philosophy. We still think in a very idealistic fashion. And most problematically we communicate us. Okay, so to slowly yet effectively get to the finale. Okay, so just again, something that I need you to sort of understand and see this also from a gender perspective. Aristotle's formal logic, I mean, this is a syllogistic logic, right? So you remember, syllogism, reasoning, right? I mean, the classic syllogism was, anybody remembers? Socrates is a man. Men are mortal, right? So Socrates is mortal, right? This is how we reason, right? This is how we syllogistically, logically reason. So how do we do it? How do we make this happen? And you see right now, expressis verbis, that the logic is primitive, so primitive, and yet for 2 millennia we have never come up with anything more complex. We are very simple. You know, we like to think of ourselves that we are so complex. Yet the way we think totally contradicts this. So the axiom of identity, of course, or the principle of identity called the positive, right? So A is always A, simple, right? Now, the second, interestingly, the principle of the negative. So non-contradiction. What is a non-contradiction? Well, it's a repetition of this, right? If you negate the negation, you end up affirming, right? Logically. So again, A is not non-A, right? And finally, the principle of excluded middle, or dichotomy. All too well known, I'm sure, either or. You cannot have it all. You cannot be in 2 places at the same time. Either black or white, hetero or homo, and so on and so forth. Okay? And now, interestingly enough, it's a at least it parades. It's a sort of apparently it's a sort of dichotomy of X, or maybe A and non-A, right? So basically the ones above. So what you see here is basically a very interesting sort of proposition, because all of these 3 principles express exactly the same. So we could have just one that would definitely sort of, you know, express exactly the gist of the matter. Like the Bible. The Bible uses so many words, and yet expresses like the initial opening of the Bible. You know, we need several sentences, and yet every single one of them, upon closer reading, expresses exactly the same message, but just phrased differently, right? So it's like as I said, it's like a trance. You know, you're stuck reading and rereading the same message. That's part of its primitive legacy. So now when you kind of look at it from a gender perspective, well, the picture becomes clear, right? Because A is A, man is man. No. And a man is not non-man. There is no woman. That's the trick. There is no B or X or C or whatever. You know. So a woman is essentially non-man. Men do not see a woman as different. Men see their own negative, okay? Their own negation. And eventually, this closes the business in a sense that, you know, you get to choose between a man and not man. Right. So this is something that I'm sure you're all very well familiarized with. So this is just a snapshot of the Derridian legacy. I mean, he's the one to have coined the concept of logocentrism to explicitly kind of show us, demonstrate the problem. And given that ours is a culture predicated and determined by language, well, we have to sort of understand that whether we like it or not, that this dimension is to be dealt with properly. And given that this very well, centralist sort of regime has projected this logic of dichotomy, of non-contradiction, then we have a problem, well, politically, ethically, socially, and so on and so forth, right? So hence his proposal to develop a deconstructive machinery as a critical instrument to deal with this, right? but that's, I'm sure, something you know. So let me move on directly here. So phallogocentrism. Well, this is it. This is what Irigaray does. She prefaces logocentrism. She basically puts it in a very simple way. That yes, there is logocentrism in our tradition, but interestingly, this logos has always been masculine. Okay? So in other words, it has been masculine. It's a male offspring, in other words, and also has been expressed in the masculine gender. Okay? This is important. So, in other words, as she says, men dominate language entirely, both on the level of long, I mean that's a structuralist distinction here, long and parole, right? So, on the level of communication and structure, okay? So, in other words, to paraphrase Nietzsche again, if you believe in grammar, you believe in dogma. Because this is something that, so of course, little by little, we come to understand that it is not us speaking a language. It is a language that speaks us. And we are
and probably she argued that a new kind of
symbolic. Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is her, ultimately,
I'm thinking of Kristeva. It's very superficially obvious. I don't want to delve into that. But Kristeva, for example, she acknowledges that women have to enter the symbolic by committing matricide.
Yeah.
They have to kill the mother.
Yeah.
And she has been obviously a persona non grata in some feminist areas.
Yeah.
I was just comparing them, and they are so engaging.
Yes, so rapidly to respond. You're right.
But you don't have to, these are just questions. If we are running out of time, just...
Sure. So let me rapidly. Yes, you're right. Absolutely. Yes. So ultimately, that's what Irigaray will propose. Will have to propose. So if language structurally and communicationally is essentially logocentric, phallogocentric, well then women cannot count on men, cannot trust language, have to invest themselves. Unfortunately, take on yet another shift. Yeah, they have several shifts and jobs to take care of already, but they have to find the time and energy to do it because no one will do it for them. So yes, and this requires that women should basically go and create, build from scratch, a totally new symbolic that will resonate with their own, well, bodies. You know, and this is exactly, and you read Female Desire, right? I mean, this is exactly how she starts to sort of do this and to construct a specifically female desire that is part of their female embodiment, you know. It's not some sort of hydraulic system, pipelines, you know, and then a kind of erectile, dysfunctional, you know, very much economy of arousal and, you know, detumescence. But it spreads differently. It is born differently. It plays out differently. We need a different language for that, you know, because masculine language does no justice to it, to the specificity of female desire, right? And then again, with Kristeva, we cannot go into this, but just rapidly, I mean, recently you must have heard, I mean, she's been accused of being a communist spy, so we have to be, you know, also cautious here and beware. But ultimately, I mean, she's grown to be the ultimate star. I mean, if you go, I do recommend you to go and explore her website. She's like the mother queen. It's amazing. I mean, of course, she's been such a prolific writer, a great mind, a philosopher, absolutely. And of course, we can deal with her feminist or quasi or pseudo-feminist claims and so on and so forth. She was very much, I mean, ultimately very Lacanian, or Lacanianist, in fact, even more, thinker, and in very many cases writing very kind of feminist unfriendly passages. And then she's been very harsh, you know, towards feminism in general. So that's, you know, that aside. But yes, but again, I mean, what she has made of herself, Jesus, is like megalomania. This is exorbitant, you know. It's like really, don't see her.
Maybe she's performing as well.
Well, she might, but you know, you can perform differently, right? Always. Well, she has chosen this one. All right, so let's finish with this slide rapidly, and we'll sort of rapidly close up tomorrow. Just to exemplify and then sort of for you to see that logocentrism, what feminist, and phallogocentrism to be precise, what feminist analysis of language have actually proven, what they call false universalism. And here I hope everything gets explained in a clear way. So you have the specific, you have the generic, you have also the examples, and you have the two sort of linguistic pillars of our civilization, Indo-European, I mean, and here, of course, Greek, Latin, and English, because we communicate in English right now. So, and you see that the sort of a generic as a term, ontologically, as sort of feminine, doesn't exist, right? Everything is generated from the masculine, okay? And you see that clearly, right? And also the examples are shocking. Like, especially, I think, these two. So, interestingly enough, anthropology is the study of a human being, right? Well, gynecology, it's not the study of women. But it's supposed to be, right? But it's the study of female genitals. This is shocking. This is absolutely shocking. You know, so you see the colonizatory, imperialistic, if you like, devouring, insatiable, devouring kind of instinct on the part of generative, well, generic and generative, masculine terms, right? Also misogyny, misanthropy, obviously. Now, even homosexuality, I mean, this is also shocking. Because in proper established psychiatric literature until today, and even psychoanalysis, there is no lesbianism as a proper clinical entity. We talk still until today about female homosexuality, full stop. There is no lesbianism. Proper science doesn't recognize lesbianism, okay? It's a feminist fiction at best. Right. So here, especially, I think so under Guinness, from Greek, now Latin, it's also interesting, because also vir, right, here, it's not supposed to be R, but S, sorry for the mistake, vis, right? But the terms like virtual, right? Virtual is the field of forces, it's the physical field of forces. So vis, force. But virtue, right, virtus, of course, is the foundational concept for the discourse of morality, right? Virtuoso, virtue, you know, virtuous, right? So definitely it expresses a not. Also virility, you know, it's definitely nobility, right? It's ennobling. Now, interestingly enough, this is, I think, the most interesting part, because obviously the Latin term designator for a woman is mujer, I can produce, right? Comes from comparative of mollis, molior, which means literally, as you see, gentler, softer, more delicate. And definitely it was, etymologically and genealogically, it was a term that designated a married woman, okay? A married one. A mature one. Interestingly enough, there was no designator for a non-married woman in ancient Rome. So there were also feminas, and this is where from feminism derives, unmarried, the upper class. And this is the elitist legacy. So now going back to my point from before, you do need resources to start thinking critically and seeing the world as a more complex place, to actually grow political and developing this desire to change something. Again, you know, this is the logical trap. You know, why would we desire to change something? You know, like from the Matrix, the blue pill or the red pill? The dangerous or the calming and peaceful? And most people will go for the peaceful, you know, because they want their life to just go the regular pace and mode, and people do not really need change. And, you know, believe it or not, but most people find it so okay to live their life as they have forever. You know, change is not, at least in Western culture, for Western societies, considered something, you know, desirable, really. We have evolved, but we have changed very little, you know, practically this much. So this really creates this kind of, as I said, on the one hand nostalgic, but negatively nostalgic atmosphere, you know, that we keep on recreating by revolutionizing, like the question from again, the film. How do you expect to be a revolutionary if you're such a traditionalist? You know, I mean, that's not really held together, right? So yes, so this, feminism is exactly the root term for, for feminism, and yes, also emphasizing the social dimension, right? That these women have been usually, they did receive inheritance, they inherited money, or they're, you know, luckily they had some generous and loving fathers or some, you know, husbands that died early and they kind of, you know, inherited the fortunes. Different sort of trajectories there. That's what's important. And I think that's part of the Irigaray's lesson for today. I mean, that I had wanted to also emphasize. That basically it's that politics, so we need an ethics quite, again, different from de Beauvoir. You remember de Beauvoir's book, Ethics of Ambiguity, right? So it's not about ambiguity. It doesn't get us far, if it gets us anywhere, in fact. But we need an ethics of sexual difference, and that's yet another of Irigaray's works that I also encourage you to read. An ethics of sexual difference. An ethics that can start to why difference has to be considered sexual in the first place, or as Irigaray would like to put it, sexuate. Well, because definitely sex is the connection of bodies out of which a new life is generated. So in that sense, if we want to have a new life generated, well, we have to have two different parties, right? Parties that come into this enterprise together on a par, okay? So that one recognizes the other as different, okay? We're not the same. And that's the beginning of a potentially alternative future, okay? Out of which different differences can be proliferated. And that would be the end for today. Thank you for your patience. No.